So in this next video, I will show you how you set up teleportation with VRTK inside of WebXR. Let's continue in the scene we just built. So first of all, we need to add a teleporter, and we also need to add a curved pointer. Right click your hierarchy, go to Tilia, prefabs. We need to add locomotors, teleporter, and we want a teleporter instant. We'll now also right click again, go to Tilia, go to prefabs, and we'll go to indicators, object pointers, and we want a curved pointer. For this, we want this to be on the right hand. So just for the sake of us understanding the way that this is set up, we'll just add a dash and add a R at the end. So for the right hand. Then we will use the right hand for teleportation and the left hand for axis move. Right now we don't have an activation action because we don't have any of the buttons mapped. The thing that we need to map now is the thumbstick whenever you click the thumbstick down. In this case, we'll be using a Quest 2. Inside of the actions here, you can see we have the grip set up from last time, but the script itself will only activate that grip button. This means that we need another button action or Boolean action. So right click your WebXR add-on folder, go to create, go to C# script. And in this case, we'll call it web thumb. Double click it, open it up inside of Visual Studio. Once again, basically the same setup as before. So we are using Cinia.action and we're also using WebXR. This is going to be a Boolean action, just like before. We will have to remove the start functionality. We want a public variable. It is going to be our thumbstick controller. So in this case, or thumbstick on the controller, so WebXR controller, and we'll just call this controller as well. Just like before, we need a receive function right here, where we'll say controller.getButton, and the button that we want to get, it's our WebXR controller.button types, and we want the thumbstick. That's basically what we need to set up. So more or less identical to our web grip. We'll save it and we'll jump back into Unity. So now back in Unity, we can set up an action for our left thumb. Right click your actions, create an empty game object, and we'll call it right hand thumb. And this right hand thumb will get our web thumb script attached to it. And just like before, it just needs to know which controller. So right hand R, add that into the controller. Now we have a Boolean action for our controller press. This means that we can now go into our curved pointer and tell it how it's set up. The follow source is actually going to be our hand. So we go to hand R, and we add that to our follow source. The activation action is going to be our thumbstick. So in this case, we'll say right hand thumb is going to be our activation, but we also want it to be our teleportation action. So we'll say right hand thumb to the selection action as well. Nothing will happen right now because it's set to select on activate. It needs to be select on deactivate. So as soon as we let go of the button, it will teleport us. So as soon as we've set up our curved pointer here for our right controller, we need to go down to our select event. Inside of the select event, it's currently empty, but we need to define that we want to teleport when we have actually selected the point in space where we want to go. So in this case here, go to the plus button, it'll add one of these elements. Now what we can do is we can take our teleporter, we can drag that down into this object here. And instead of the no function, if you click this, you should be able to select the teleporter facade and go to the teleport. Now we can go to the teleporter, and inside of the teleporter, we can tell it what our target is and what our offset is. The WebXR camera set is going to be our target, and the offset is going to be the cameras, so where our headset is located at. And that's basically it. Now you're able to teleport with VRTK, but inside of WebXR. The next thing that we want to set up here is our axis move. So that's going to be for the left controller. To set this up, we need an axis move VRTK Tilia script. So right click, go to Tilia, prefabs, locomotors, axis move, and you can choose which type of axis move you want here. I'm just going to select the horizontal slide. Going to slide us around in the scene. We'll just keep the name as is. And here you can see it wants a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. There is just one small issue with this, that the standard setup of WebXR will only give you a vector 2. So we'll have to do a bit of custom scripting to get our different 2 axes out of the controller setups. So to do this, we need to find a float value for the X position and the Y position, so the coordinate system for our thumb pad or thumbstick. So right click our WebXR add-ons here, go to create and choose a C# script. We'll make one for our float X value first, so we'll just say web float X. Now open up the script so that it's open in Visual Studio. Once again, remove these, add our WebXR and Cinia.actions. And different this time is we need a bit of Unity behavior as well, so we'll also be using Unity. Instead of a mono behavior, once again, this is going to be something different, but instead of a Boolean action, it's going to be a float action. We won't need the start function this time either, but we'll have to set up one public variable and just one protected variable. So we'll say public, this is going to be our controller. So just like before, it's called a WebXR controller. And again, we'll just call it controller. Let's set up a private instead of protected float value, and we'll call it the x-axis. So inside of the update here, we need to figure out the vector 2 for our thumbstick. Then we need to change that vector 2 into a singular axis, so the x-axis, and then we need to pass out that axis to our VRTK. So let's set a local variable, so var vector 2, and we'll set that equal to controller dot, in this case, it's not going to be the get button, it's going to be the get axis 2D. And that's of course again for our WebXR controller, and it's the axis 2D types. And then we only have thumbstick or touchpad as the options, and it's going to be the thumbstick because we're working with a MetaQuest controller. Then we'll set up our x-axis here equal to vector 2 that we just set up dot x. Now we'll be able to use the receive function to just pass the x-axis out to VRTK. And that's basically everything we need. So now just save, go back out into Unity. And now here in Unity, let's actually go in and just duplicate the script file, Control D. And instead of calling it x1, we'll call it y. We'll open it up in our editor. And of course we need to rename, so float y, and the local float here, we'll call it y-axis. We'll also change this one to the y-axis and the final one to the y-axis as well. And of course here, the vector 2, we also need to get the y-axis off of that. But other than that, it's basically that setup, the same setup as before. So we'll save that file and jump back out into Unity. So here back in Unity, we need to set up actions for the X and Y positions of our thumbstick. So right click our actions, create an empty game object. We'll call it L web axis float, and we'll need one for the Y axis, and we'll also need one for the X axis. Select the Y, add the float Y. It needs to know which controller. Well, it's the left-hand controller, so we'll add that left-hand controller, select the float X, and then add the float X to that one as well. And of course, add the left-hand controller to this one as well. This means that we can now set up the axis slide. So if you click the horizontal slide action here, you can now see that we have horizontal and vertical axes. So horizontal is our X float value here, so horizontal, and Y is our vertical axis. So now these two are set up, so it'll take the controller input. But this input, of course, needs to know what to push around. We have a target, we have a forward offset, and a rotation pivot. All of these need to be set up to move the correct objects. So in this case, we'll say the XR camera set is the target that we want to move around. The forward offset, that's actually our cameras. When you test it in Unity, it's actually the main camera. When you're testing it in the browser, it's going to be the camera right. So for this sake, I'll just use camera right, because then I'll test in the browser in a moment. That's the forward offset. And then our rotation is always going to be our camera main, because that just follows the rotation of the player. This is basically everything you need to have all the basic functionality from VRTK in WebXR. If you want other buttons, you just need to add these grip buttons, trigger buttons, or whatever A and B buttons from your controllers as these add-on scripts, and then configure them the same way we just did. I hope this was helpful to you, and see you in the next one. And thank you for watching.